there's resistance now, true plant resistance to a virus called turnip yellows virus. Quite a bit of it is around. Very hard to say what it actually does in terms of yield, because it's almost impossible to get local data. Well, there is no local data from Ireland as to what it does, but I mean, it certainly is like carrying a cold or a flu and trying to play a match. I mean, you'd be better off without it, and that's probably the best way to describe it. So the way I'd say it to growers is, if you have the choice of getting a variety with turnip yellows virus resistance, you should take it. It's part of the package.
Getting to visit field trials is a chance to learn and perhaps improve what's been practiced on your home farm. The trial site managers have to manage with the same environmental conditions as everyone else, and this gives us a chance to learn from their successes and mistakes and to spot varieties which might suit our farm. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. Crop varieties react differently to conditions outside the norm, such as later sowing, high rainfall, a drought, etc. Trialling varieties over a number of years is essential to weed out the weakest and keep the strongest candidates. I caught up with Tim O'Donovan, Technical Director in Seedtech, to discuss the new varieties which are coming through their system. I started by asking Tim about the winter oilseed rape in the trial system.
Yeah, well, sure. Look, I suppose as we're kind of in a little bit of a broken spell in harvest, this was always to put the fear of God into people growing oilseed rape back in the 70s and 80s and 90s even, Michael. The breeders, the people who cross and create oilseed rape varieties have worked extremely hard, in my opinion, in the last 20 years. Now we have varieties on the market that, and on the Irish recommended list, I suppose, that's the important point to say, is that, you know, the Department of Agriculture do a very good job testing varieties. And like, you know, there's no point in having a variety sitting in the east of England today, you put it into your field on the 15th or the 20th of August, and it doesn't get weather like we're getting at the moment, broken weather. So really and truly, the breeders have kind of solved a lot of those problems for us. Now, it's not made it absolutely, you know, proof that it's going to survive a hurricane or anything, but certainly the risk of seed spilling out onto the ground shouldn't be a risk on people, shouldn't be a risk for people growing oilseed rape anymore. We've got very, very good disease resistance for the wet weather diseases in Ireland. And I suppose, look, light leaf spot is the big one for us. It's got a disease pattern that affects oilseed rape in two ways. The first time it affects it is, as everyone kind of would be aware of it, in February, March kind of time, when it affects the leaves. Then it transfers up to the pods and onto the stems. And at this time of the year, we go out to the fields and we assess varieties for how much light leaf spot is on the stems and the pods. And what light leaf spot can do, and what the breeders have actually figured out, is that it actually can cause premature ripening on certain side branches or the main branch. So you get a very uneven crop. So you're trying to harvest a crop that some of it might have been ripe 2 weeks beforehand, and some of it might be still ripe. And light leaf spot can do that because it interferes with the way that oilseed rape transfer nutrients and water from the roots and the stem and the leaf up into the developing grains, and filling the grains or the seeds with oil and with carbohydrate and protein. So the breeders have overcome that risk as well. I mean, varieties that we have on the market, Aurelia, Veron and Dart, they would score very, very highly for resistance to light leaf spot, but they also score in our own private trials when we're assessing them, and we'll assess them now after harvest, even the stems. And those three varieties score very highly in terms of controlling that disease or preventing that disease risk to farmers. And what we also do, Michael, is in our own plots, which you might have seen at the open day, was we've and it's in our booklet as well, actually, is that we've shown people that these varieties that don't have as good light leaf spot, they actually have a lot more seed shed on the ground before harvest. And there's nothing that will annoy a grower or a combine person more than watching the combine pass over lovely little green seedlings at the bottom of the canopy when they're harvesting. Okay, that seed should be in the tank, it shouldn't be on the ground. I suppose, look, the third thing, and it's probably the lesser of the 3 points, is that there's resistance now, true plant resistance to a virus called turnip yellows virus. I mean, look, we've done testing in our fields. Quite a bit of it is around. Very hard to say what it actually does in terms of yield, because it's almost impossible to get local data. Well, there is no local data from Ireland as to what it does, but I mean, it certainly is like carrying a cold or a flu and trying to play a match. I mean, you'd be better off without it, and that's probably the best way to describe it. So the way I'd say it to growers is, if you have the choice of getting a variety with turnip yellow's virus resistance, you should take it. It's part of the package. So that's oilseed rape, Michael.
And Tim, just with that in terms of oilseed rape, look, we're probably only what the guts of a month away from the next crop. We haven't got the current one out, but we're still only a month from getting the next one in. Is there,
Yes.
in terms of the three or four varieties that you talked about there, is there any, in your opinion, from your own stable there, that's particularly suitable to earlier or later sowing?
Yeah, for earlier sowing, we'd go with Aurelia straight away. And then we've got a new one called Dart. And the difference between them is very simple. One has been on the list, the Irish list, for a few years, the other hasn't. And I mean, we'd always say to growers, I mean, get a variety that's on the Irish recommended list. Don't be, you can try new varieties if you want, by all means, but try and stick. Your main variety should be on the Irish list, because the department have tested it in weather like this. We have, in terms of later sowing, yeah, for us it's a Veyron, because now the other two varieties, Aurelia and Dart, can be sown as well later. And I'm talking about mid-September, Michael, now as late. Um, Aurelia, or sorry, a Veyron is more suitable to mid-September sowing than Dart or Aurelia, and that's mainly because it's a bigger variety to grow over the winter, and it develops the canopy more aggressively in the early spring. And what we find is that if you're targeting reaching a GAI of 2, kind of the start middle of February, to save your nitrogen bill, a Veyron, if it's sown late, will reach those targets, whereas other varieties wouldn't be as bulky coming into the springtime. And that's, part and parcel of growing a competitive, profitable crop of oilseed rape, is achieving those GAI targets as we go throughout the spring and early summer.
Okay, but I presume in general, we'd be recommending that oilseed rape would go in August if at all possible.
Oh, absolutely. Like in the northern, colder, northern facing sites, heavier soils, 15th of August onwards. And if you head down the country into the south of the country, it's generally the last days of August, the first days of September. But like, to be brutally honest, Michael, down in Waterford, where we are with the trials, and the Department of Agriculture sowing down in Cork, like, we wouldn't be afraid at all of sowing oilseed rape up to the 15th, 16th, 17th of September. Once the seed beds are good and you have a reasonable window coming for a few days after sowing.
No, no, know your site, I suppose, Tim, is the main one there in that one, I suppose, really, isn't it? Know your site.
Absolutely condition. Like, seed to soil contact is so important for oilseed rape because it's a small seed. Cereals are less affected, but certainly, we've done 5 to 6 tons to the hectare in the plots, so on the 16th and 17th of September.
Yeah, and we're starting winter barley. There was certainly lots of combines moving around us there yesterday. Certainly not today, but certainly was yesterday. In your winter barley plots, there was yeah, the BYDV tolerance has moved on a little bit more. You might just talk us through a little bit about that, because I think you were saying on the day it's moved a little bit further than maybe it was over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so look, our variety that's on the list is Joyo. It's been there now. It's been grown in the country since 2019, and we're very, very happy with it. And even though it can go yellow in the month of April, where, BYDV challenges occurring in the plant, it still tolerates the virus, which is what it's bred to do, and it delivers a profitable yield. And we see that each year with growers and with merchants. You get a phone call there in April, hey Tim, that Joyo has gone yellow, but you don't get a call in July because it cuts what it's supposed to cut, Michael. Okay. And that's how I know it's working. I don't get the complaints then at harvest time. Um, we've moved it on a little bit further now. We have a 2 row barley coming to the market in 2024. It's called Arcade. It's got the same basic gene makeup as, in terms of BYDV tolerance, as Joyo, but it has a second gene added. And look, instead of it being a super duper double resistance, or sorry, double tolerance, basically you're getting a little bit of a cherry on top of the cake, Michael. Like, the tolerance that's in Joyo is good enough to do a very good job, but you get a little bit extra kick with Arcade. against the BYDV strains. But it's marginal, the difference between them now, to be truthful with you. Arcade in its own right, though, is a bloody good variety. I mean, we don't see Rinco, we don't see net blotch, we don't see mildew in it. We haven't really been challenged with brown rust in it, but that really wouldn't be a concern. I mean, of people that are growing it and, will consider sowing it early, just be aware, like, Arcade is a two-row. It has very, very good grain quality. Very good if you want to roll grain, especially big, bulky grain. But just watch out for its straw height. It is taller than the other two rows on the market, and it does need a PGR program to ensure it's standing at harvest.
I was going to ask you, Tim, actually, just with all the different varieties there, because there was a good few on show there at the time, and obviously winter barley, Ramileri was starting to bite at that
Yeah.
stage, and probably a little bit, and we'll come back to it in spring barley maybe in a minute. Are the breeders making any progress at all in terms of trying to combat the Ramileri? It's a difficult one to try and get around, but is there any moves at all, do you think?
Well, to be honest, look, we'd score our varieties every twice a week coming up, grain fill and onwards. And you might say, okay, let's say the 7th of June, the week or two before our open days, you'd say, God, yeah, some of those varieties are quite green, winter barleys, and there's some are starting to affect Ramileras coming into them. A week later, they've all evened up. It's more, I think, to do with the physiological age of the barley. Some of the later ripening ones at times they can show the symptoms later in their cycle. I just think that can happen. Now, if you can segregate the varieties out to early ripening and later ripening and score them as a block, then you can pick out differences. But let's say it's the difference between a 5, a 6, and a 7, not a 1 and a 9, Michael. Okay.
Okay.
So it's not black and white. And that's the main issue with the breeders have to challenge they have to overcome is how do you get reliable, robust, repeatable scores to say variety X is good on Ramillaria and variety Y is bad. And that's the challenge that they have. We, like, as good and all as the people are with scoring diseases, Ramillaria is a very challenging disease to score. And it can be confounded by physiological spots, sometimes even sprayer damage. We see a lot of sprayer damage this year, especially in spring barley, and it has induced Ramillaria, in my opinion. And then, we don't have it this year, but in 2018 and 2022, we had an awful lot of sun scorch in our barley plots. And that can confound the scores you get on Ramillaria.
Well, it's just a difficult one. They're trying to make progress towards, but it's slow, as they say. And
Yeah,
I suppose moving it on a little bit to winter wheat, and again maybe just with that, I mean, there's lots of reports, probably maybe further south from where you are, down towards Cork and that, and growers and advisors, reporting that God, it's very hard to keep crops clean of septoria this year, even using the very best of fungicides.
yeah.
What do you see in terms of the horizon on winter wheat over the next couple of years? Are farmers, are we in trouble a little bit, or is there something that's going to kind of save us until we get something terrific?
Yeah, well, look, in fairness, what's after happening, Michael, you can trace it back to 2020 when we found out in Ireland that the varieties that were based on cougar genetics had a problem. Okay, and it's like as if the breeders were suddenly half their material had to be pulled out of trial because it just wasn't going to work, and they figured that out in 2021 in the UK, and suddenly then you could see less and less varieties coming into trial. So we are where we are because of what happened in 2020. Okay, probably we would have pulled in Seedtech maybe 30-40% of our lines immediately because they had this problem that we identified with cougar genetics. And those varieties should be the main varieties on the market today. Okay. So that's the problem. That's why it happened. It's very simple. Where we are now is we're probably 3 years away from market, 4 years, I would say, commercially, from having a very good Septoria uh, resistant or tolerant line. Um, there's other ones that might just about fill the gap in the meantime, but I'm not sure that they have the complete package that you need in Ireland for KPH, for sprouting, and for fusarium. Okay. We often get very good varieties that'll have a 7 or an 8 for Septoria, and suddenly, bang, you get a year like this with broken weather, and they light up like a Christmas tree with fusarium. Coming up to harvest, they start sprouting. We can't make seed out of them. They suddenly disappear. So the varieties that are on the list, to be fair to the Department of Agriculture again, Michael, they have been tested in challenging conditions and they're there for a reason. Septoria is a challenge. I mean, look, you saw it at our open day. The difference between 16th of October sowing and early December sowing is like it's like chalk and cheese. It's like playing a junior B football match and going up then and playing the All Ireland. That's the difference going from December, even November, back into October sowing in the south of the country. I mean, all I can say to growers is, I mean, the varieties that are there, the Septoria scores are robust in terms of there hasn't been any shift this year as far as I can see in the varieties. In terms of the disease challenge that was out there this year, I would say I think the consistent or the more not consistent, what's the word? The more frequent rain that fell in April and May. If you go back and look at the last 8 or 9 years, we didn't have that. And if you can imagine, if you, I say, Michael, if you went back and listened to your podcast for a few years, people would have said to you in August, God, only for those 2 or 3 dry days or week in April, we were goosed with Septoria. That didn't happen this year. Okay. So we are where we are because of the weather in April and May. Um, I don't think you can do a whole lot with sowing days, except where people need to really look at is their overall picture. I mean, if you're under pressure and you have to sow wheat on the 20th of September, is there another crop you could sow on the 20th of September that can reduce that pressure a bit?
That's where I was going next. Actually, I was going to ask you about winter rye. I presume that's where you're going, because I know
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
you
Well,
had winter
first of
rye
all,
on show
I'd
there.
say oilseed rape, Michael. Right?
Oh, it's right. Okay.
I mean, so if you can sow something in August and take pressure off of your September October window, take it. Um, Certainly, rye is an option for the middle of September. Yeah, for sure. Won't work for everybody, and you have to really go with your merchant on this one. If the merchant wants it, talk to the merchant beforehand, because the world's worst thing is to have a variety or a grain, sorry, that you're trying to sell next year, and your merchant says to you, "I don't want it. I can't sell it." So make sure your merchant will take it off you there before you sow it. I mean, even considering oats, like you can sow oats later in the year, and it takes pressure that you don't have to sow as much then in September, October. Like what you're trying to do, Michael, is there's 14 weeks between the middle of August and the middle of November. You've got to try and spread your sowing window as much as possible. That actually reduces the pressure from the 25th of September to the 15th of October. They're the critical days that you have only so many days to get your crops in. And if you can spread the window out either end with rape and rye at the start, maybe oats and spring crops at the end, that does certainly help. But like, look, after beans, after rape, after break crops, oats again, a crop of winter wheat is going to do, they expect it to do close on 5 ton to the acre in Ireland. I mean, the chemistry is there. We're spending enough on it. I mean, I think it'll deliver. I think the grain fill looks very promising in our winter wheats at the moment in the trial site, even though there were challenges with Septoria. And the reason why I'll say that is wheat has an ability to take reserves from its stem. And we did receive adequate sunshine in April and May to build up the stem reserves. So the wheat will actually fill its grains from its stems about 10 to 12%. And I think also the septoria that was on the in the crop mightn't have affected grain fill as much. Now, look, I could be proven wrong, but at the moment, grain fill in our trials looks pretty good, pretty decent, even though we had a big challenge with septoria, Michael.
Okay. The other one, Tim, and I just want to finish off on this one really because time's kind of against us a little bit. Spring barley varieties. Obviously, spring barley had its challenges starting out this year, also kind of a little bit later. But in fairness, a lot of the crops in certain your trial set were looking really well. In terms of the barley varieties that you had, and you have a good lot on show, is there any one in particular that you would think is maybe more suitable to a particular market than another?
Yeah, well, look, the four varieties we have on the recommended list, Laureate, which is on the malting list, we'll call it, okay? Amity, Florence, and Mermaid. Those four varieties are malting varieties. That's the first thing. They're all being used and in major production with the big malting companies in Ireland, Bort Malt and Malt Company of Ireland. So like that's their first home, we'll call it. But if you were looking for a dual purpose feed barley, malt barley, so say a grower says, look, I've got a contract for malt with Malt Company of Ireland and I'm growing Amity, but if you grow an extra field of Amity, you can roll that because it's the biggest grain on the market. And if somebody is trading grain for rolling and wants to assemble big bowl grain, Amity is head and shoulders above the rest of the spring barleys on the market. No question about it. It's a really true all round barley and it has grain quality that's suitable for malt as well. Okay. If you're on the other side of the country, then I mean, in terms of a dual purpose feed barley slash malt barley, Florence would be the one to fit the bill. Again, it's with Bort malt. It's been malt. It's going to be malted large scale this year and next year, and as well as that, it's got a very stiff straw. It's a descendant line out of Irina, which was a very popular variety for guys growing feed barley around the country. And again, it offers people the option. Look, I can grow a malt barley, I can get the premium, but I can also grow extra area of it. I can put it into a strong field after maize or maybe after potatoes, and it won't lodge. I mean, in our trials, you might have seen it, Michael. We've got plots that are receiving up to 300 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, which is what 240 units. And we've Florence drilled in those plots deliberately because we don't see it ever lodging. Okay, so that's a variety of choice there. If you're on the other side of the country, and if you're looking for a dual purpose malt and feed, and then the other two varieties I mentioned, Laureate and Mermaid, they're more kind of malting varieties in true sense of the word. They are suitable for feed, and we've lots of farmers growing them for that purpose. But they are more suitable for the specific malting growers, especially in terms of the straw strength and managing their PGRs. Okay, I suppose. Look, Laureate wouldn't be on the recommended list, or would have been on the recommended list if its straw was a little bit stronger. But then you got to say, well, why then is 60% of the UK spring barley area made up of Laureate? Okay, so the UK is the largest barley in the UK. Mermaid certainly would be equal to or as good as straw of the controls, but it wouldn't be. It's not as good in terms of Florence for straw strength. Not weak, but certainly not as good as Florence.
Okay. And Tim, just a final question around spring barley, and again, thinking about the winter barley. Is there any moves to breed in some of that BYDV tolerance?
There is. It's a question. Look, the breeders would say to me, I'd say the effort isn't there, Michael, because they don't see. Sorry, no, the effort is there. They're doing it, but it's not as near to market because the real pressure for BYDV is winter barley sown in Europe in the end of September. Okay, middle of September, end of September, and that's where the original genetics came into the plant. To take an elite line such as Amity or Florence or Mermaid and to bring BYDV into that takes it just a longer time. You got to remember the first BYDV variety was a tolerant variety, or the genetics were discovered in the 1960s in Ethiopia. That's where the genes came from. I saw the first major variety kind of around 2010, 2011. And it's taken us in Seedtech, or in Ireland, I suppose, because we're the first with it, until 2020, the 2020s to get a variety that suited growers. So spring barley is starting at a later time, but I'd expect within 10 years we should see a spring barley line that will be reasonably well competing on the recommended list with BYDV.
Okay, all good news. Lots of new genetics coming through, and it was certainly very evident from your open day back in June that there's a huge amount of work going into by the breeders and also with yourselves. And I think there's huge value for any farmer or anybody going to any of these trial sites to have a look to
Yeah,
see what's happening, because I suppose you deal with the same weather as everybody else, and your trial site was a bit later than normally would have been, and it's great just to see how varieties, all the different types of varieties, react with that. Tim, thanks very much. We're a little bit out of time. Thanks very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to next year's trial sites already.
okay, thanks, Michael.
So that's all for this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy, thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.